This is Vinod and Sneha. Today, let's talk about the basics of photography, that is the exposure triangle. Ansel Adams says that the single most important component of a camera is the 12 inches behind it. So what does this really mean? Today we have advanced in technology that phones like iPhone, Pixel, Samsung have some of the best cameras in the market with complete manual controls in it. However, not everyone with these phones are the best photographers. Why? Because the camera only takes an image, it does not make an image. Who makes an image? A photographer makes an image. The camera only takes the image that the photographer visualizes. So even if you have the basic DSLR that you have bought from one of the mega discounts, you should not get discouraged or disheartened when you see a very good image taken from a very expensive cameras. You can still make the best image with your basic DSLR lens or a camera which you have purchased. For this, you need to understand the basics, and that is the exposure triangle. We should also understand that your best friend in photography is light.
So what is the exposure triangle? Every camera records information with its three basic components. That's the ISO, the aperture and the shutter speed. So what are these three things and why are they really important for us and as photographers? And what we'll do is we'll probably run through each of these and let you know how these affect the image. ISO is nothing but International Organization for Standardization, and they provide proprietary industrial and commercial standards. So any industry or any manufacturing sector that needs to build a product or make a product, they need to conform to these standards, and ISO is one such standard for photography that measures the sensitivity of light. And the ISO numbers vary from camera to camera, so be sure you check these ISO numbers before you purchase your camera. And the base ISO for our camera is 100, which means it is minimal sensitivity to light, and it gives the maximum image sharpness or a clean image. So if you're a landscape or a studio photographer, you can easily shoot at the base ISO, in our case the 100 ISO. However, if you're a wildlife or a sports photographer with varying light conditions, it will be better if you can purchase a camera body which has a better ISO performance. For now, you can know that the lower the ISO number, the cleaner the image will be. And if you increase the ISO in your camera, the camera is going to add fake light or extra light, or the sensor becomes extra sensitive to light. And if you increase the ISO, you get noise in the image. What is noise? Noise is nothing but freckles like structure on your image, or grains that come into your image. For example, if you take a photograph of yourself having dinner in a restaurant somewhere, you would see there's a lot of grains in the image, and this is because the cell phone automatically increases the ISO because there's not much of light in the indoor environment or in the night. So if you can add flash on your camera, but that will it will give you a better image, but it will also create unwanted shadows. The camera, the smartphone flash is not that effective. And photographers, of course, they hate noise in their image. So if there are efficient noise removal softwares like Photoshop or any other software that you can use, Lightroom, but it is effective, but you'll have to compromise on the image quality and image sharpness. So the sharpness is gone when you try to remove a lot of noise from your image. So we'll cover these advanced topics in a different video, but for now let's stick to the basics, saying that ISO, the lower the ISO, the better will be your image.
You can imagine your eye in comparison to that of a lens. So the aperture is nothing but the iris present in your eye. So when there is a lot of light, or if the scene is very bright, the iris contracts itself according to its sensitivity and adjusts to the light to gather up all the information so that you can see everything clearly. So when the scene is very dark, what will the iris do? It opens up to gather up all the light so that you can see everything clearly. Same way, in a lens, the aperture plays a very important role in letting the amount of light pass through to a sensor of the camera. The aperture is measured in f-stop, or it is the fractional increment of the amount of light that it allows inside the camera sensor. An f-stop is calculated by the focal length of the lens divided by the diameter of the aperture of the blades of the lens. An f-stop is not measured as 1, 2, 3, 4. It is always measured as in fractions, like 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, 2, 2.4, 2.8, 4, and so on. Why? Because each stop lets half as much of light as the previous, and so one stop is darker than the next. So when you are purchasing a lens, make sure you see the minimum and maximum aperture mentioned on top of the lens. Aperture also controls something called as the depth of field. It simply means how much of the scene needs to be in focus. When you use f-stop numbers like 1.2, 1.4, your depth of field will be shallow, which means like when you are taking a portrait shot of a person, you would want only the person in focus and the background is blurred. So the depth of field will be shallow, meaning you are using smaller f-stop numbers where aperture is wide open. When you want everything in the scene to be in focus, you would use f-stop numbers like f8, f11 and so on. When you are using higher f-stop numbers, your depth of field will be larger and hence recording all the information that you see in the scene. Landscape photographers and macro photographers generally use higher f-stop numbers so that they can record each and every information present in the scene.
Shutter speed controls the motion or action in a photograph. So basically, shutter, as the word suggests, is like a door to your sensor. So in a camera, in a DSLR, there are two curtains or two doors which make the shutter. So whatever you see as a final image on your sensor is when the shutter actually closes, as in it opens, allows the light, closes, and then the image is recorded onto your sensor. So speed of the shutter controls how much of light you allow into the camera as well. So the higher the shutter speed, the lesser the amount of light that comes into the camera. So if your fastest shutter speed on your camera is 1/8000, that means the image is taken in 1/8000th of a second, and the longer is your shutter speed, the more the amount of light that comes into the camera. So if you have like 1 second or 2 seconds or 3 seconds, the shutter is open for that much amount of time, and that much amount of light is allowed onto your sensor. So camera manufacturers also have a pitch where they use the frame FPS or frames per second in their marketing, where higher the frame rate, it's beneficial for sports or wildlife photographers. So the fastest camera today is the Canon's 1DX Mark II, which shoots up to a mind-blowing 16 frames per second in live view, and the Nikon's D5 does about 12 frames per second. So probably the other terms that people use are longer exposure times, which means that your shutter is open for a longer duration. So similarly, you'll see waterfalls or oceans. So the more the shutter speed is where the movement is evened out. So that's why it looks smooth or silky.
So this was all about the exposure triangle, and we have covered the basics of photography part 1. We would be talking about the parts of the camera and the theory of reciprocity in our next video. We hope you have liked this video. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel and stay tuned for more.